Hey, I'm Evan with Lens Pro To Go, and today I'm going to be talking about the Sony FS5 and specifically how it compares to the Canon C100. If you want to just know about the features of the FS5, I highly recommend watching our first look video that Greg did. I'm a freelance director and DP and a Canon C100 owner. I shoot on lots of different cameras, but the C100 is the one that I decided to own and have to just be able to use on any jobs that come up. Personally, I think it's the perfect camera for that kind of shooting, and I really love it. I was really excited to see what Canon did with the Mark II, but was honestly underwhelmed. The Mark II is a great camera, but it just didn't really seem to be offering me anything that I personally really wanted for the price jump. When I came into Lens Pro to pick up the FS5 after it had first come in, I immediately felt like this was a camera that might finally replace my C100. The first thing I noticed is how light and modular this camera is. This thing is so small that when you strip it down, it almost doesn't feel like a real camera. This is really nice if you're trying to run gimbal setups, as it's not going to break your arms after a long day shooting on a Movi or a Ronin. The camera is also really modular. The monitor can be moved anywhere onto the body using a 1/4-20 mount, and the handle can be removed and easily attached to something else using a 1/4-20 mount built inside its rosette. The grip feels great, and you can control all of your important settings from right on the grip, which is something I've always loved about my C100. You can just click in the thumbstick and change your shutter speed, your white balance, your ISO, which is great if you're shooting on the run. The FS5 does what the FS7 didn't and makes it just that simple on a Sony camera. The first thing everyone seemed to ask me about the FS5 versus my C100 is skin tones. And I'll admit, straight out the box, C-Log skin tones are a tiny bit better than S-Log in my opinion. But when I took Greg and had him look wistfully into the distance, I found that it was really easy to match these cameras actually, and that it was almost impossible to tell the difference between the two. So I really think that skin tones aren't as big a deal as a lot of people are making them out to be. Something worth mentioning is that the FS5 has 4K, which is an easy feature to give it a leg up on the C100. But I will say that the 4K didn't impress me as much as the 1080 10-bit 422 did. If I were shooting stuff on this camera, I would be trying to use 1080 as much as possible because it just looks way better than the 4K in my opinion. The 4K is good if you need it, but it's really not great. I was really impressed by the image out of the FS5 in general. The one thing I will say about it is that I feel like I've just got exposing my C100 dialed in. I can handle super high dynamic range situations and know exactly where my exposure needs to be. And with Sony cameras, I always feel like it's a little more of a guessing game. They don't handle underexposure well, which is a style that I tend to shoot a lot, and that's probably part of the problem. But if you're shooting S-Log, I found myself just trying to push everything as close as I could to clipping to try and get it to not be noisy. Which brings me to high ISO performance. The lowest ISO on the FS5 in S-Log is 3200, so you're not getting any lower than that, and on a lot of cameras that would be considered a high ISO right there. 3200 looks good, 6400 looks okay, and anything past that depends on your picture profile. I would probably personally still give low light advantage to the C100, just because with the way exposure works on the FS5, you're reading ISO 3200, but you're rating it as if it's more like 1000, so you're not getting the same kind of ability to push into high ISOs in low light situations as you can with the C100. So now on to the features that really stood out to me and set the FS5 apart. The two things that were most interesting to me about this camera were its electronic variable ND filter and high frame rate modes. The FS5 has an internal ND, which is something the C100 has as well. What the C100 can't do is dial in your ND as if it were a fader ND, but without any color shift whatsoever. This is done easily using a wheel on the side of the FS5, and it works super well. I'm personally not big on changing exposure mid-shot, and I didn't do any like interior to exterior tests, but just having that ability to use a fader ND without mounting it to the front of the camera is really convenient, especially if you're using cinema lenses and don't want to have to get into matte boxes and all of that kind of stuff. The FS5 also shoots up to 240 frames per second in HD. My C100 only does 24, and I will say I have the Mark I. If you have the Mark II, it'll do 60, but still there's a big jump between 60 and 240, and 60 wasn't enough of a selling point to get me to go to the Mark II. So the FS5 does 240 frames per second. It is a buffered 8-second record, so you can't just run continuously, but it looks awesome. A quick note on that buffered recording: if you're worried an 8-second buffer isn't enough, I would recommend looking into the FS7. I'm definitely considering buying an FS5 early in the upcoming year, as it's the first camera to really impress me and feel like it offers me a whole lot more that my C100 doesn't. That being said, the C100 Mark II is still an awesome camera, and if you really love that Canon color, I highly recommend it. If you're considering the FS5, I highly recommend renting it from lensprotogo.com. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to call us or email us at service@lensprotogo.com. Thank you so much.